And I really explained it to a lot of people because I used to play golf, but I don't anymore. I don't know, I'm kind of an attention deficit. I would last about 4 holes and I go goofy and light my hair on fire. And it just didn't work out too well for me. But I like to promote my books. And so this is kind of the commercial break of the presentation, if you want to call it that. The first book is called The Bridge. The reason I wrote The Bridge, and I have some here and for sale, and I want to give a couple away. There's going to be a little bit of live participation here. I'm going to ask a question. If you know the answer to it, I'll give you a book. But if you don't want to buy a book, at least pick up one of these brochures because it explains a little bit about the book and it also explains what I do with the proceeds from the books.
Yes.
And ever since from day one, both books, all proceeds go to some charity. And it started out with Drug Rehab Center Teen Challenge. And early this year, I got connected with a group called Resurrecting Lives, and it's an organization formed by a bunch of doctors. And the focus of this organization is veterans with traumatic brain injury. I feel like that's the injury that's the most misdiagnosed right now with the soldiers coming back because they're so well protected with armor. There's a lot of head injuries. They get concussions, but there's no blood, they're not bleeding. But they go back out into the field and they come home and they get misdiagnosed. And so all the proceeds for book sales are going to Resurrecting Lives. And it's a neat organization. So that's kind of enough about the books. Except The Bridge, I call it The Bridge because both of these books they're novels and they occur in rural America in the 60s. The Bridge is written because it was my goal for the reader when they're reading it to remind them of something that occurred in their life when they're growing up. And that seems to have worked in the reviews I've gotten. Paperboy is just written from the perspective of the paperboy. One of the, everyone in here had a lot of jobs growing up. One of the jobs I had was paperboy. It was the most coveted job in town, but it was the much worst paying job. I think it ended up being about $0.25 an hour or something. By the time you deliver the papers, in rain or snow or whatever, then you have to go around and collect. And Joe and I were talking about it. The people, that was in the days before air conditioning, so there's a screen. You can hear them in the house. You knock on the door. They're going. It's like $8 for a month. Come on, baby, I come back tomorrow. I know you're there. I just live down the street. Good grief, But when you're a paperboy, you get to know a lot more about people than anyone else in town. Particularly on that day when you go collect. Because you knock on the door and a lot of times they'll ask you to come in. So you step inside the house. And that's when you learn whose food you should eat at the church social and whose you should not eat. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I'm not going to have that. It looks good, but no, you can have it. And so there's a lot you learn about as a paperboy. I'll get to something really cool that I learned as a paperboy that very few people in the town. I grew up in a town of 1,000 people. It's 1,000 now. It was 490-some whenever I was growing up. So I literally knew everybody in town. I started first grade. We didn't have kindergarten. When I started first grade by the end of the year, I knew everybody from first grade through 12th grade because it was all in one building. It wasn't one room. There was one building, or one little campus. And so you just know everybody. And it's really a unique experience. And my wife is from St. Louis. I met her at Missouri, but we got to telling stories, or she would hear me telling stories. I get together with classmates, and we get to talking about things we'd done in high school. And she said, "You need to write a book." Well, that's why the books got started. And they got put into the Christian genre, not because I sit down and I say, "Okay, I'm going to write a Christian novel." To be put in the Christian novel, it's just that there's no garbage in it. And so when the publisher decided to put it into, decide which genre to put it in, because they asked which genre is it, and I didn't even know what a genre was. What are you talking about? I don't know. It's a book. And so you write a book because you want to have fun writing. You don't write a book because you want to sell books. So then after I got it written and got it published, I decided I want to sell it. So that's the reason I started doing a donation thing, because I would tell people, like, even if you don't like the story, money's going for a good cause. Okay. So thanks for having me. Thanks for the opportunity to come up and talk to you about Ira Bibble. Being from a small town, I know what it's like when you're from a small town and you go to another town, people are always making fun of you, and so I really like to promote our little area. Ira is said to be from Patton, but actually he grew up in an area about halfway between Patton and Marble Hill. Patton does not have an airport. Marble Hill does. So I claim that Ira Bibble is actually from Marble Hill because Marble Hill has an airport. And so there you go. So meeting people is kind of a stretch. Aviation influences in my life. The guy who took me for my first airplane ride, his name was Gene Hayes. Gene died yesterday. His wife died a month ago. So it was kind of I read about it in the paper. I thought, oh man, his visitation is tonight. And Gene's wife, he took me, and it was a 170. He took me, my sister, my mom, and my dad all for our first airplane ride in a 170. And so I didn't think anything about it, but I'm standing because I was younger than my older sister, always have been. And so I'm standing in front of the seat. My dad's up in the front, and so he actually let me, reach up and pull the controls of it like that. But Gene's wife, Dorothy, was famous for something. In 1942, she's the one that designed the poster that says "Uncle Sam wants you." Wow. Dorothy Hayes. So she was kind of famous in our parts, and you only know that kind of stuff if you fly. Dorothy died about a month ago, and I'd ask people, "Hey, Dorothy Hayes died." Who? Dorothy Hayes. You know the lady that designed that poster, "Uncle Sam wants you." Really? That lady did that? Who is that? And so he explained. I can't believe how many people didn't know about Dorothy. I heard someone talking about the Blue Angels. You were talking about the Blue Angels. Okay, I went to an air show. I was a little kid, and there was the Blue Angels, and at that time they were flying F-4s. I had a cousin a couple years older, and that inspired him to join the Air Force, and he ended up flying F-4s. I did not join the Air Force, but I wanted to learn how to fly. My dad learned how to fly, and right after that, I did as well. And then a movie. You saw Spirit of St. Louis starring Jimmy Stewart. There's a movie, Strategic Air Command. Oh, yeah. And who did Jimmy Stewart play in Strategic Air Command for a book? Can you name the guy? Can you even name where he was from?
Dutch. He was a
Dutch Holland.
Yeah.
Yes. There you go.
The ball player.
Yeah, Dutch Holland played for St. Louis Cardinals in the movie. Yeah, very good.
Wow.
And so I thought that was pretty good. Kind of brought it home here, Strategic Air Command. And then, playing pitch and catch with my dad in the yard. Every once in a while, a plane would fly over. We lived, at that time, there wasn't an airport in Marble Hill. We were about 30 miles, as a crow flies, we're about 20 miles from Cape Girardeau. And Cape Girardeau, the airport there, was a training base. And Cessna used it as a dealership. When I was really young, there was, at a point in time, there were maybe 50 new Cessnas on the ramp at Cape Girardeau. And so every once in a while, somebody get lost or something come our way. It's pretty easy to find Cape. You fly east, you see the river, then you got a 50-50 chance. If you turn around, you find Parks. You go the right way, you find Cape, or you go to Memphis or wherever, or Bible. At that time, it was still an Air Force base. Then on my paper route, when I was collecting, I saw some medals on a wall in this one house, and I asked Mrs. Chandler, whose medals are those? And the medals belonged to her husband, Homer Chandler, who was a fighter pilot in World War I. He left the U.S., went to Canada, became a Canadian citizen, and flew for the Canadians. He never actually flew in combat, but he went to France, and he was an instructor pilot in France during World War I. Okay, so Mr. Chandler flew airplanes in World War I. Kind of tucked that away, didn't think much about it because I was only like 12 years old at the time. But then I got to talking to people when the Ira Bibble thing came up. I got to talking to people. Hey, did you know Homer Chandler? I wonder if he knew Ira Bibble. Well, why would he know Ira Bibble? Well, because he flew airplanes in World War I. And today, I think I found about 6 people that knew that. No one knew that. I was a paper boy, so I knew that Homer Chandler was a fighter pilot. I call him a fighter pilot. Okay, he flew airplanes. He was an instructor in World War I. Weren't they all fighter pilots? So it was a her. And the thing I wanted to mention was aviation's kind of twisted nature. When we see this airplane taking off, Lindbergh's kind of bouncing along. His first solo, he almost broke the landing gear of the plane that he was flying because he was bouncing so much. So it kind of reminds me of his first solo. In 5 years, he really hadn't learned a whole lot. So he certainly hadn't learned anything about gross weight. Because it took off and filled up with fuel. But aviation really is kind of twisted, if you think about it, because we're all bent on speed. Speed kills. We were bent on defying gravity. And the thing that's really interesting to me is that pilots, we're all kind of control freaks. How many in here are pilots or that fly? Probably a few pilots in here. We're all kind of control freaks. The moment you take off, you kind of lose control, because you all heard takeoffs are optional and landings are mandatory. So you're forced, you're going to have to come back, and you're going to have to land in a specific area unless you want to break something. And so you kind of lose a little bit of control right there. The other thing I think is kind of interesting, this winter I was in Oklahoma, calling on some dealers out there. By the way, we're a steel chainsaw distributor. We sell chainsaws and the steel S-T-I-H-L brand name in the 6 states. And we began in Marbleville because that's where our family was from, and then we branched out from there. But I was in Oklahoma calling on some of our dealers out there. In Oklahoma City, they have 2 airports. 2 really nice airports. They're both named after guys that got killed in plane crashes, which I thought was kind of like, really? Somebody better to name your airports after? So you basically got to die in a plane crash to get an airport named by it. So my flying experience, my first solo, I'd like to, if we have time at the end, I want to tell you about my first solo, because I think it was a little bit like Lindbergh's. Because I did fly the Atlantic, but I had a little bit better airplane than he had. And I didn't go straight across, went up across the Arctic Circle in a Skymaster. And that's what I thought. And but we made it, both engines, ran the whole time, which I found out later, that's kind of a miracle to fly 150 hours and both engines keep running. But they did. We went all the way from here to Athens, Greece, actually. Delivered an airplane. So that was kind of fun. Some other experiences I had flying is that before they put the control over the Grand Canyon, my dad and I flew about 2,000 feet below the rim up through the canyon in a Cessna 172. And it was just dead still, dead calm. It was really a spectacular airplane ride. And that was several years ago. Now, of course, you have to be about 12,000 feet to fly over it. You can't do that anymore. I did a Lewis and Clark flight. I went along with 2 other guys. We flew a 172 from Cape Girardeau to Bend, Oregon, and we never got over probably 1,000 feet off the ground. Stayed over the river the whole time. One neat part about that flight is that there were 2 of us that were pilots, one that wasn't, and the other guy was just joking to him. He said, "What am I going to do? I can't fly." I said, "Well, you're kind of worthless. You can be the historian." And he took it. What he did, he got a GPS, and he got the Lewis and Clark Journal and downloaded it. Got the Latin longs, and so he was reading to us. Okay, up ahead we should see something like this, and this is what occurred. And we got up around Boonville, Missouri. He had his head down and back, had headsets on, and we're in a 172, and we're about 500 feet off the ground, and there's some verga, or there was some rain, and it may have been hitting the ground, but it looked like it wasn't hitting the ground. And we really wanted to stay over the river. And so John was in the left seat. He said, "You think you want to fly through?" I said, "Sure, we'll stay over the river." He said, "Sure?" He said, "I'm not sure how thick that is." And then right about that time, there's some cloud of ground, katoons of lightning. Well, I guess we'll go back. So we peeled off, and we went about 3 or 4 miles. It was a real small cell. But just before we made the decision to go around, Tom, who was in the back, read, and after reading oh gosh, I can't think of the name of the book that tells about the Lewis and Clark's trail. Anyway, he read the journal, and it says, right about here, it says in the journal that it was raining so hard that we had to come about the shore because we couldn't see where we were going. And that was the only place where we had to get off the trail, was right there. It was one of those situations where the hair kind of raises up in the back of your neck, and you think, wow, that was kind of weird. So, but why my interest in Ira Bibble? Well, when you grow up in Marble Hill and you fly, you know that Ira Bibble is from that area, and you know that he taught Charles Lindbergh how to fly, and you're pretty well certain that without Ira Bibble, Charles Lindbergh would have been nothing. And that's the way it is in southern Missouri, because he would have tried to claim all the fame. Of course, none of that's really true, but he is given credit for being Lindbergh's first flight instructor, and he did come from an area near Patton, Missouri. But, so that's all I really knew for a long time. And then I had the opportunity to be the Masters of Ceremonies at a regional commerce banquet. The chairman of this association called me, and said, hey, would you be the MC at this banquet? It's a deal with a bunch of chambers of commerce from several different areas come together with this big banquet and all this kind of stuff. And I said, no, I don't, at that time we have 3 boys. They're 25, 29, and 32. But at that time they were all, I think, early teens, doing everything. And so I didn't have time to do that. All right, so I said, no, I won't. This guy, the guy's name is Greg. I said, no, Greg, I get it. Sorry. So then my wife comes home, and she knows how I am about this. By this time, we had moved from Marble Hill to Jackson, Missouri. We really moved up. See, you got to understand, Bowling County is at the bottom of the socioeconomic chart. There's a little county to the west of us called Wayne County, and they're the lowest too. So we just make fun of each other, and everybody around makes fun of us. I don't know how it works up here, but in Clayton, you probably talk about people from Melville that way, and Melville probably talks about people from Festus that way or something. It just keeps on going down or something. I'm not sure how it works, but down there we're at the bottom. So we moved to Jackson, so our kids could be in a bigger school. And I just, people I would hear, they wouldn't know where I was from. I'd hear how they talk about people from Bowling County. And it really used to bug me. Anymore it doesn't. I just let them, when that kind of thing starts occurring, I started asking questions, and I let them dig a really deep hole. And then, so where'd you grow up? Oh, Bowling County. And you can see them looking for the hole in the carpet so they can get out of there. But so she comes home and she says, I just had lunch with Joanne. She said, this is really going to make you mad, I'm going to tell you. Joanne was a friend of hers. She's taking a class at Cape Girardeau at Southeast Missouri State. And taking a class in sociology. And in this particular day, the instructor was talking about Scotch-Irish. And he was talking about how lazy and worthless and all these bad things that the Scotch-Irish are. Not that I know, that's what he was saying. And he said, well, if you want a good example of what the Scotch-Irish look like, go out and drive out in Bowling County. Just looking around and, at the houses and the people out there, that's what they are. Which is not right, because Bowling County is mostly German and Dutch. It's German and Dutch. And anyway, she told me that. I said, what a bunch of crap. So I called Greg. I said, Greg, have you found anybody to do the MC? No? Okay, I'll do it. On one condition. What's that? Well, during the banquet, when I'm introducing people, I get to make some plugs about Bowling County. Because, so I started coming up with names of people from Bowling County who went on to be famous. Rush Limbaugh the first. Not the third, he's on the radio. Russell Limbaugh the first was from near Marble Hill, a little town called Scopus. And there were some other people too. And I kept telling everybody, I said, at the end of the night, I'm going to introduce you to the most famous person from Bowling County. Well, of course, that was Ira Bibble. Everyone else I had talked about, I would get up and I'd introduce someone who had gotten an award. As it turns out, I did 12 awards. 10 of those people had gone to high school in one of the high schools in Bowling County, and they were from a 6-state area. It was just really weird how that worked out. And so after they would talk, I would mention I'd do about a 1 minute on another person from Marbleville or from Bowling County. Within the night, I said the most famous person from Bowling County I'd like to tell you about is Ira Bibble. Of course, no one knew who Ira Bibble was in the old room. There might have been about 6 or 7 people. So then I explained that he had taught Charles Lindbergh how to fly and gave a little bit of rundown on Ira Bibble. Okay. When the banquet's over, a lady comes walking up to me. She said, I've got a picture. She goes, I have an Aunt May who used to live in St. Louis, and she never married. And when she died, I got her pictures because I collect pictures. And I have this one that I have 2 pictures. One is of a guy standing in front of an airplane, and the other is a guy and my Aunt May standing in front of an airplane that says, Aunt May and her boyfriend, Ira Bibble. And she said, would you like that picture? Sure. And I'm sorry, I forgot to bring it, but I have it in my office, hanging in my office. It's about a 5x7, and it's a picture that she had gotten from an attic from a lady who lived in St. Louis, and Aunt May and her boyfriend, Ira Bibble. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Well, it was really cool. I was really taken by it, so I got the picture and had it framed. And so then I wrote the books. And I wrote one book. And when you're trying to sell books, the thing you got to do is you got to get out, you got to meet people, you got to kind of brand yourself a little bit. And I contacted rural Missouri and said, hey, why don't you do a review of my books? And that's one thing you get magazines to review your books. And the guy said, well, do you write? I go, well, yeah, right. I got a book, so I means I write. He goes, well, if you do something for me, I might do something for you. And it really worked out well because I wrote the article for him, and then 2 years later he wrote a review on one of my books. And it really did so well after he did that. It took him 2 years. So I wrote this article about Ira Bibble. Well, the only thing I knew about Ira Bibble up until then was that he had taught Charles Lindbergh how to fly. I didn't know the year that it occurred. I really didn't know what part of Missouri, of the area around us it was really from. So it caused me, I'm not an Ira Bibble expert, but I'm an Ira Bibble enthusiast, let's put it that way. So it caused me to dig down and do some research. I actually got in touch with some of his family. There's a barbecue place in Concordia, Missouri, just on the south side of I-70, Biffle's Smokehouse. If you ever drive south to Kansas City, pay attention around Concordia. He has some billboards out in I-70, Biffle Barbecue. He's a descendant of one of Ira's brothers. Ira Bibble had no kids. He's kind of an odd guy. He's kind of like Ira, I guess, too. When you walk in, he won't talk much, but he has a brother whose name is Claude, who lives in Texas. And Claude was helped me out finding some information about Ira. And so there's May's boyfriend, Ira Bibble, and what kind of drove me to be more interested in it was the challenge when my wife came home and said somebody made fun of where I grew up, which always kind of gets me going. The fact is, it is a rural area, and it is kind of goofy, and people do some really funny things in the area that I grew up. And it used to drive me crazy. Now I kind of appreciate it. But so I want to go through just a little bit of genealogy of Ira Bibble here, just to give you an idea of where he came from. I'll do this real quick. I'm not going to do a book of chronicles on you, so kind of hang with me here. Johannes Bibble was born on August 30th, 1699 in Bavaria, Germany. And then he had Johannes Bibble, they weren't very creative back then, who was born in 1728, and Johannes Adam Bibble immigrated to North Carolina from Germany. Johannes was born in 1728, he immigrated to America. And then he had a son, and guess what his son's name was? Johannes Paulus. Was born in South Carolina. And then he had a son, Jacob. Jacob was born in 1763. Johannes died in 1777. I'm going to give you some dates and then give you some things to relate that with. 1777 was when Marquis Lafayette landed in Charleston, South Carolina, and brought the French in to help us with the Revolution. I really like to make fun of the French. But the fact is, they were pretty instrumental in us getting our independence from Great Britain. Probably wouldn't have done it without the French. But I'll talk about French wine here a little bit too, which is kind of interesting. It has nothing to do with Ira Bibble, but that's, I get off the subject all the time, so what I do now when I'm talking to people, I just kind of plan it, and that way it kind of controls it a little bit. The Valentine Bibble was born in Patton. Our Johnson Lacey was born in Tennessee in 1824, and he moved to Patton. And Johnson Lacey was Ira Bibble's grandfather. Valentine Bibble, who was Ira's father, was born in Patton in 1858. So sometime between 1824 and 1858, the family moved from North Carolina to Patton. Maybe during the Civil War, I'm not sure. Ira was born in 1886 in Patton, Missouri. It's called Patton, Missouri, but actually, if you're probably not familiar with the area, but if you go to Patton, to get to Patton, you go down I-55 to Perryville. You go south from Perryville about 18 miles on Highway 51. It's a really curvy road. Okay, once you go through Patton, and about 3 miles south of Patton on this curvy road, you turn off on a county road A, which is even curvier. It is paved, and you go about 4 miles, and that's the area where Ira Bibble actually grew up. He was born in 1886, and keep in mind, during that time, 1886, no electricity, no running water, anything like that. He had several brothers and sisters. When he was about 9 years old, his father left and went to Colorado to go to school to be an astronomer. Never came home. And about 6 months before his father left, the last baby was born. About 6 months after his father left, his mother died. So Ira Bibble and all his brothers and sisters were just passed around to relatives. And so that was kind of his upbringing. Was when he was 10 years old, he was an orphan, and he's living with different families. And they kind of got passed around. No one lived with any family for more than a year, according to Claude. Biffle, the story goes, is that they just kind of passed around from relatives and to friends. And this was, around 1905, 1908, 1900. So times were pretty tough. Keep in mind, no electricity, no running water, a bunch of little kids. And what do you do when the father runs off, never comes back, and then the mother dies, and they got young kids? The oldest one was about 11 years old. Ira was around 10. So that was his upbringing. So in 1886, the year he was born, what else was going on? The first Tournament of Roses parade occurred in 1886. Carl Benz patents the first car with a motor, with a gasoline engine in it in Germany. This is really kind of cool. Jacob's Pharmacy in Atlanta begins selling Coca-Cola. And at that time, it actually had cocaine in it. So those were the times back then. Aircraft related, the aluminum manufacturing process was developed, and that became critical later on. So there's really nothing to it. I don't try to add, try to make more of it what it is. But the year Ira Bibble was born, aluminum was basically invented, or that process was created. And 100 miles south of here, Ira Bibble was born. Now, Ira had 6 brothers and sisters. They were all born between 84 and 1899, actually. His father is left, I mentioned that. And then by 1910, Ira, he left home between 1904 and 1908. And I haven't been able to really determine exactly the year of this. During that time that he left home, when he was about 16 to 20 years old, we know he left home. We know he left here. And he never wrote back. That was before texting. No one had cell phones back then. And he didn't. He was really pretty much estranged from the family. And so the family had no contact with him. But in the 1910 census has him in the Army in the Philippines in 1910. So we know that about Ira. Now we fast forward to 1914. So what's going on in 1914? It's the first out of sight land out of sight flight. It occurs from England to Norway. It's the first time an airplane actually crossed the water and no one could see land. And this is kind of interesting. Austria declares war on Serbia. Germany declares war on Belgium and France. France declares war on Austria. And England declares war on Turkey, on Austria and Germany. Russia declares war on Turkey, England, and France. But have you heard about the legendary Christmas truce? When the Brits and the Germans were fighting on Christmas Day, they all laid down their guns and went out and sang Christmas carols together. Christmas is over, they go back to the trenches and they're shooting each other. That occurred that year. And Babe Ruth played his first professional baseball game, got 6 hits, and helped win the game for who? Boston. There you go. Everybody says the Yankees. President Wilson proclaims Mother's Day. Good for the mothers, good for him. And the Army Air Service comes into being as part of the Signal Corps. Now, technically there was an aeronautical division created before that airplanes were first adopted specifically by the Signal Corps. So the Air Force really had its roots in the Signal Corps, so you could fly up and send signals back. And Ira Bibble is credited as being one of the first 4 pilots in the Army Signal Corps in 1914. So, first 4 pilots. But when you go online, there's a lot of statements to talk about Ira being one of the first 4 pilots of the Army Signal Corps. But there's also a lot of information about the Army Signal Corps and how many aviationists they're called. Yeah, aviators or something. But aviators at that time included guys that flew booms and anything else. So it's a little sketchy. But anyway, he was in the Army Signal Corps in 1914. Now he spent World War II in San Diego as a flight instructor. And there were several places online where he's being credited with having the most students, soloing the most students of any other instructor in the Signal Corps or the Army Air Corps, or whatever it's called, up until about 1919, 18, until the war's end. At the end of the war, he started flying the mail for the Army because the military flew the mail to begin with. The first time there was U.S. Postal Service or mail service by air, it was handled by the Army Air Corps. and that's where a lot of guys got experience flying, is through flying the mail. Now, back then, all you really had to do to be number one as far as soloing students was survive. Because most of the instructors died with their students. Because if you look at you go on the timeline, look at the history of a lot of the early aircraft manufacturers, a lot of guys just died. In the crash, airplanes were made, they were flying coffins up until, I don't know when, well, some people still can't fly coffins, but he certainly survived. And then in 1919, he made a historic flight flying the mail from Cleveland to Chicago during the winter. And the reason it was so historic is because several other pilots had tried and crashed. So, I don't know what drives people to want to do that. I don't like to fly in ice in the winter today, even in a plane that has no icing, with boots and heated props and heated inlets and everything. It still gives me the heebie-jeebies. But these guys were jumping up in these Curtis Jimmys and kinds of airplanes, just a fabric wing, and an engine didn't run very well, and everything just kind of rattling and just shaking and carrying on, and it went off. Probably because they didn't know. Now we got this flight service station that tells us all this, gives us all the bad news. If we didn't have flight service, we could probably fly more often because we just take off and go. Now we would die, but we would fly more. Talking about the France, technically the first, we were the first reliable airmail service. The Army Air Corps of the U.S. had the first reliable airmail service. The French had the first airmail. In 1870, in Paris, they released a bunch of balloons that had a total of 600 pounds of mail, and they thought that each balloon would go to where it's supposed to go, but all the balloons basically flew to Germany, and they lost the mail. But so the French claimed to be technically the first with the airmail. That's just for French, isn't it? But the French were supposed to have done that. I'll tell you something else about the French. Well, I'll wait. A little bit later. Okay, let's fast forward to 1922. 1922, the KC Country Club Plaza in Kansas City. That's when it was built. And J.C. Nichols hired the architect Ned Delk to design that, and designed that for Seville, Spain. It was the first plaza, the first shopping area in the U.S. that was designed to handle people driving in with automobiles. So you drive to Kansas City, that happened about the same time. When you see the Country Club Plaza, that happened at the same time as something else that occurred in 1922. Something very important, such as the Eskimo pie was invented in 1922 by a guy from Iowa. Curly Lambeau's Green Bay Packers joined the NFL. Reader's Digest publishes its first magazine. And the St. Louis Browns had a pitcher who struck out Babe Ruth 3 times in a row. What was his name? That's a little tougher. St. Louis Browns. No. Hub Pruitt struck out Babe Ruth 3 times in a row, 1922, played for St. Louis. First airplane lands in our capital, D.C. And an engineering student from Wisconsin, going to school in Wisconsin, actually from Michigan, decides he wants to learn how to fly, drops out of school, and tells his mom. His mom says, okay, I'll let you learn how to fly, but I'm going to do the research and find the best flight instructor in the U.S. She does some research and finds out that there's one flight instructor that has had the most students of anyone else and has the best record of soloing people and not dying with the students. And that guy is at that time living in Lincoln, Nebraska, and it's Ira Bibble. So Lindbergh, with about $500 in his pocket, jumps on a motorcycle and leaves Madison, Wisconsin, and goes to Lincoln, Nebraska, the Page Flying Field, to learn how to fly. He took his first airplane ride with another fellow. Bibble was his first instructor. Now, there's a little controversy there too, because according to some things you read online, Lindbergh couldn't afford the insurance, because when you learn how to fly, you had to come up with extra insurance before they would let you solo. And supposedly he couldn't come up with the money, so he didn't actually solo there. He ended up soloing in San Diego, according to one record. But in his book, Lindbergh says that he did solo. So I'm not sure what happened unless he didn't come up with the insurance, and he and Ira just kind of stuck out there, and he let him solo. But there are records on Lindbergh's website, on a website that has all about Lindbergh. It talks about him soloing on Page Field, and it talks about the Jenny, about how he took off. He was bouncing, and when he landed, he almost broke the landing gear, get the thing back on the ground. And any of you who have flown a tail dragger know that that's pretty standard. You almost break the landing gear, get on the ground. I had a Centauri for about 3 years, and I feel pretty lucky not to bust the tires, getting that thing on the ground a few times. But Ira would say of Lindbergh that he was a very accomplished student, and he never made the same mistake twice. Lindbergh would say of Ira that he was a hard-boiled, cantankerous guy who really didn't seem like he even liked to fly. Well, Ira had a really good friend who had just been killed in a plane crash. One of his best friends had just been killed in a plane crash just a few days before Lindbergh showed up to take flying lessons. So he really wasn't in the mood to fly, as it turns out. Well, Lindbergh shows up with money, so Ira goes ahead and gives him instructions. So that's the story, and I'm sticking with it because Ira taught Lindbergh how to fly, and without Ira, Lindbergh wouldn't have done anything. Anyway, so the years that follow, 1927, Babe Ruth becomes the highest baseball player, making $70,000. The first balloon to ascend over 40,000 feet goes up that year. And what airport did it fly off of?
Scott Field.
Scott Field. There you go. Hawthorne grade. Parks College, America's oldest aviation school, opens over here across the river. And then Lindbergh flies to Atlanta after only flying for 5 years. And the first commercial airplane lands at Midway Field. It was a Boeing 40. And guess who the pilot is? Ira Bibble. Okay. 1929. Let's fast forward a few years. 1929. Tarzan, the adventure comic, appears in the comic strips. Hoover authorizes the building of Boulder Dam, later became Hoover Dam. The Popeye cartoon appears. Popeye is from near here, down in Illinois. Babe Ruth becomes the first to hit 500 home runs in a single season. The Arabs attacked Jews in Israel. That's still going on today. The Cubs blow an 8-0 World Series lead, and the A's scored 10 runs in 1 inning. Some things just never change. Love the bash the Cubs too. The game of bingo was invented. That was so important. And then Lindbergh and other partners farmed PWA Airlines here in St. Louis. Jimmy Doolittle makes the first all-instrument flight. Ira Bibble becomes the first corporate pilot. Charles Walgreens buys an airplane, a Sikorsky amphibian, S-38. He ended up with that. That wasn't his first airplane. But he buys an airplane, and no one in the corporation could fly. And supposedly, that was the first corporation to buy an airplane, and they didn't have a pilot, and they actually hired a pilot to be their corporate pilot. Now, Ira Bibble was Walgreens' first corporate pilot, flying the Sikorsky route. And being a historic guys, you probably know what a Sikorsky looks like. Someone took a boat and just attached it to an airplane. That may be all that really happened. I'm not sure, but they really had to learn how to make an airplane look like an airplane. They say, hey, we need to have something to float. So they got a boat, and they put an engine on top of it and some wings across it. And, I guess that'll fly. Yeah. See if it'll fly. And so that's where he flew the corporate executives around. They would land on land as well, so it was amphibian. So he was the first corporate pilot in the, possibly in the whole world. In 1931, he starts losing his eyesight, so he stops flying. 1934, 3 years later, after he stopped flying for Walgreens, don't know how, but he ends up, he's penniless. It's thought that he had a net worth of close to $100,000 when he stopped flying for Walgreens. 3 years later, he's penniless, and he's dying in a flop house in Chicago. With his wife at his side. There's not much to know about his wife, except that Records show that he was married, no kids. Not sure what was going on there. But Charles Lindbergh learns of the fact that Ira is in a clubhouse, and he starts a foundation, makes $50 donation to kick it off, to raise money so that Ira can be moved to a hospital. Raise the money, gets moved to a hospital, and that's where he dies in 1934. He's buried in Arlington Cemetery, Section 17, Site 22, 625. So he's hard-boiled, crotchety, moody, driven. Come from very humble beginnings. Didn't have much of a step up. Kind of abandoned by his parents, made his own way. He didn't set out to make history. He really didn't make history, but he was a little bit like Forrest Gump. He was right there when it occurred. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to Ira Bibble, but when you watch that movie, it gives you an idea how close people are when history occurs. And he was there. He was there. Lindbergh soloed. Any of you who have soloed, you know that when you solo, it's all about you. There's not much about the instructor because he's down on the ground just hoping you make it back without breaking. So Lindbergh soloed, but Bibble was right there. His first corporate pilot, and that's pretty cool. And in life, there are people who are spectators, and there are people who are participants, which most of us are, and then there are people who are champions. And I think all things considered, we consider Ira Bibble a champion. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions that I may not know the answer to? Yes.
Quick one for you, Stan. Is the surname Biffle at all common in the German environment, German world? And I'm leading up to something else.
Well, not that I'm aware of. I go to Germany about every year or two.
I've become something of a NASCAR fan. One of the top drivers in NASCAR these days is Greg Biffle.
Right.
Just wondered if they were related at all.
No, they're not. As far as Claude Biffle, who I exchange emails with every now and then, he says he's a first cousin, 10 times removed from Ira Bibble. His great-great-great-grandfather was Ira's brother. Has met the NASCAR driver and gotten some stuff autographed from him. As far as I know, they're not related. Biffle, when it came from Germany, it was actually a U with an umlaut. And they changed it to Biffle, I guess, at Ellis Island. And then it came from Konzwig, Bavaria, Germany. But it wasn't Germany when they came, it was Russian. But anyway. So,
Any other questions? Anybody else?
all right.
Thank you, Stan.
Thank you very much.
Anybody, that was really nice. Interesting. I just can't believe these are the things we're finding out as we go out into Missouri. It's just so much history out there that needs to be brought together. We'll meet again. Typically, we meet the third Thursday of the month. That's how it's been working out. We had to back off a day this month because we couldn't get the room. But for June meeting, we agreed at our Lambert History Project that we'll have a working group meeting again prior to the general meeting at 7 p.m. And I think this 5:30, did that work good for us, everybody? Okay, we'll stick with that.